Today, I'm going to show you how to make your very own ribbed beanie with no knitting needles required. All you'll need is some worsted weight wool yarn and a size F or 3.75 millimeter crochet hook. You're also going to need some scissors, of course, to cut your yarn, and a yarn needle like this one to seam up the sides because this hat is worked flat. And I have linked to all of the materials that you'll need, as well as the link to the free pattern in the description below. So make sure that you check that out before getting started. And if you have everything ready to go, then you can start watching and follow along with me. So this is a completed beanie right here. And I've made it long because it's nice to fold it over like this when you wear it on your head. It gives you an extra layer of warmth around your ears, which I prefer because it's freezing where I live. And also this hat is worked instead of like a normal hat where you would work it in rounds and then just keep going up and up and up. What we're doing here is we're making it from side to side. So our rows are actually like this, and it's worked completely flat and then seamed along one side. The reason that this hat is crocheted side to side and flat instead of in the round from bottom to top is that the stitch pattern used to create the ribbing is worked back and forth in rows by single crocheting into the back loop only of each stitch in the row below. And then to shape the crown, we'll use a technique called short rows, which allows us to create gradual height differences along one side so that the beanie contours smoothly around the top of the head. So you make your foundation chain and then you crochet your first row all the way along this foundation chain. The foundation chain doesn't end here like it looks like. It ends right there. If this is your foundation chain, so you're chaining all the way down to here, then you turn your work and you crochet your first row into the foundation chain. And then for the second row, you continue crocheting down until you hit a certain stitch number. So for this hat, it's when there's 9 stitches left, you stop and you turn your work. And then you crochet back for one row. And then again on the following row, so for every even numbered row, you crochet back down to the last stitch of the row below. So that would be this row. The next step is to connect with that first row so that we can add a little bit more length to this row. So you connect to that stitch and then turn your work and work your way back again for a row and then repeat it again. And again, once you reach the last stitch, you connect by crocheting into the last stitch that was unworked from row 1. And that's it. You keep working your way back and connecting to one more stitch from that first row until you've gone all the way down and you're back at 50 stitches. So on this last row here, I've crocheted all the way down to the last stitch from 2 rows below and connected to the very last stitch from that first row that was a full row. So now we have a full row again. And that's what creates this shaping here. This is what creates the curved edge and makes it appear that there's more fabric towards the bottom part of the hat, making it straight, and then less towards the top and curving the top. So that's what short rows are. And we're going to use 2 different methods for creating short rows for this hat. The first will be left sloping short rows. And then after that, we'll work a few rows and then make some right sloping short rows. So we're going to do this twice. First, we're going to make some left sloping short rows followed by right sloping short rows, and then repeat that again for the back of the hat. So this hat is worked in 4 sections. And then once it's complete, I'll show you how to seam up the hat along the side, and the resulting crown will fit comfortably around the head with the ribbing texture intact. So just to reiterate, what we're doing here is we're using short rows to shape the crown of the beanie by creating gradual height differences along certain sections and then allowing the beanie to contour smoothly around the top of the head. And we're doing this by, instead of working all the way across each row, we'll be stopping partway through, turning and working back. And then by repeating this over in the pattern that I've just described, you can build up extra rows on one side of the beanie while leaving the other side with fewer rows. And this creates that slope effect at the top of the hat. And again, don't worry if you don't completely understand this yet. Once you follow along with me, it'll make so much more sense. So let's get started. The first step, as you may have guessed, is to make a foundation chain. So begin making a foundation chain by making a slip knot and inserting your hook into the slip knot, and then making 51 chains. It's also important to note that when you're working your foundation chain, that you make your chain stitches very loosely, because this hat is worked side to side and the crown shaping is actually worked into the first row of single crochets, which is attached to the foundation chain. And if the stitches are not loose enough for that part of the hat, they will bunch up and it won't look very pretty. So you can use a larger hook if you like, or you can just freehand it like I'm doing. So continue chaining until you have 51 chains, and then we'll be ready to begin row 1. Okay, row 1 is just a row of single crochets. So we're going to single crochet into the back bumps only, beginning with the second chain from the hook. So while I'm working into the foundation chain, I'm just going to add a quick ask. If you're finding this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any of my future videos. And also, it'll let the YouTube's algorithm know that people are enjoying the content that I make. And it'll boost my video's visibility, helping it reach more viewers who might also find it helpful. And the more people engage, the more YouTube recommends my videos and tutorials, which means that I can keep creating free content for you all. So every like and subscribe genuinely helps me grow and helps me bring you even more crochet tutorials and patterns. And I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart. Your support, whether it's from purchasing my patterns or simply liking and subscribing for free content, it means the world to me because it allows me to keep creating and sharing what I love with all of you. Okay, with that said, once you have crocheted all the way down to the end of the row, you should have 50 single crochets. And then you can chain 1 and turn your work to begin row 2. For row 2, what we're going to do is single crochet into the back loops of the stitches from row 1. When you're looking at crocheting into the back loop, you can see that each stitch, this is the first stitch here, it makes a V. So the front loop is this one, and that's the back loop, the one that's furthest from you. So you're going to single crochet down this row, working into only the back loops of each stitch, and this is what creates the ribbing. So work your way down, single crocheting into the back loop of each stitch, and when you have crocheted 41 stitches, what we're going to do there is turn our work. So we're going to leave the remaining 9 stitches. I'm going to show you here what it looks like. The ribbing is created by the front loop jutting out since we crocheted into just the back loops. So continue single crocheting into the back loop only of each single crochet stitch until 9 stitches remain. So you'll have 41 stitches of single crochet in the back loops. And now that I'm at the end of the row, all I need to do is chain 1 and turn to begin the next row. And now we can begin crocheting the short rows like I'd explained earlier in this video. So when crocheting short rows, instead of crocheting into the first stitch like you normally would, you skip the first stitch. So my chain 1 from the end of row 2 will cover the first stitch, and the actual first stitch of this row will be into the second stitch. It'll make sense when we come back around, and the main reason for this is just to prevent bumpiness at that connection point. So beginning at the second stitch, single crochet only into the back loops of every single stitch all the way down to the end of the row. So at the end of the row, you should have 40 stitches. Okay, I'm at the end of row 3, and you can see that my work is curling a bit. Don't worry about that because it'll flatten out as you keep going. And you can see the ribbing starting to take effect on both sides. Chain 1, turn your work, and then again, Just like row 2, we're going to single crochet into each of the stitches that we had made here. So instead of 41 stitches, there are only going to be 40 stitches because we skipped the first stitch in the row below. So the last stitch of this row will be stitch 40 before we use 2 stitches to connect to row 1 and end up with 42 stitches at the end of this row. So this is what your work should look like at this point, once you've reached the 40th stitch of row 4. And the next step is we use 2 single crochets to connect this row to row 1. So what we're trying to do here is every even numbered row, we're going to connect that row to row 1. And that will add 1 more stitch until we have 50 stitches and 1 long continuous row. And the way that we do this is we had lost a stitch here because we skipped it. And the reason I did that was to prevent bulk from occurring when we connect the stitches from row 4 to row 1. Because if we had just added 1 stitch, it makes a big lump right here. So what we're going to do instead is we gave ourselves an extra stitch by skipping the first stitch here. And then we're going to single crochet our 41st stitch into the sidebar of the last stitch of row 2. So you can see this was row 1, and this is the stitch we want to end up in. And this was row 2 right here, with this being the last stitch of row 2. So there's a sidebar for the stitch right here, and I'm just going to crochet through both loops of this sidebar. So insert your hook into this sidebar through both loops, and then make a single crochet. And this kind of bridges that gap. So now we have 41 stitches, and then the last stitch is to single crochet into the back loop of the next available stitch from row 1. And then this brings us to 42 stitches. So we can chain 1 and turn our work, and then we're ready to begin row 5. And row 5 is crocheted exactly like row 3. So we skip the first single crochet, and then single crochet into the back loops of the remaining stitches. And then continue to repeat these 2 rows until all of the short rows have been connected to row 1 and the stitch count is back to 50. And of course, if you want the row by row instructions, they are available for free on my website. And I've linked to the pattern in the description below this video, so please check it out. Okay, I'm on the last row of this quarter of the hat, and I'm just working my last 2 single crochets by making 1 into that sidebar from 2 rows below, and then a final single crochet stitch in the very last single crochet from row 1. And at this point there will be 50 single crochets going across. So we're at the full stitch count. We can turn our work and begin making 3 more rows of just single crocheting in the back loop. So these will be 3 straight rows without short rows. And then once you're back at an even numbered row, so that would be row 24, we'll begin the next section of short rows. But this time they're going to slope in the opposite direction. Once you're on row 24, you're going to single crochet all the way down until you have only 1 stitch remaining. Because we want this section to slant to the right, these short rows are going to be created in the reverse order. So instead of ending at 9 stitches before the end of the row, this time we're going to end at 1 stitch before the end of the row and then turn and then crochet all the way back. So once again, skip the first single crochet and crochet in the remaining 48 stitches for row 25. Okay, so I'm at the end of the 25th row, and if you're counting your stitches, you should have 48 stitches going down this row because we skipped the first stitch. And now chain 1 and turn your work. And then single crochet in the back loop of each of the 48 stitches of this row. And I just want to point out here that you don't need to actually skip any stitches on the even numbered rows for this section, because they are being skipped at the beginning of the odd numbered rows. So from this point on, all you have to do for the even numbered rows is single crochet into the back loops of each stitch from the row below. And then on the odd number rows, skip the first stitch and single crochet into the back loops of the remaining stitches until there are only 41 stitches left. So in effect, all we're doing here is leaving one stitch unworked for every 2 rows until there are 41 stitches remaining. And this will bring you to the end of row 40. So once you reach row 40, row 41 will be worked exactly like the previous rows. So we're going to skip the first single crochet and then single crochet in the back loops of the remaining stitches. And row 42 is where all of the short rows are connected. And we're going to do this by single crocheting in the back loops again all the way down into each single crochet. So we'll be at stitch 40. And then at this point, we're going to single crochet into the sidebars of the last single crochets from 2 rows below 9 times. And don't forget, you can find the full pattern with row by row instructions on my website, and I've linked to it in the description below. And as you know, my website is ad supported, but if you prefer an ad-free version, it's available for purchase there as well as on Ravelry and Etsy. And those links are in the description too. And as an added bonus, if you purchase the PDF file, it also includes 2 additional sizes. So you can make this hat for a larger or smaller head circumference. Okay, so once you've connected all 9 short rows, the 50th stitch will be in the last stitch from row 23 that was skipped at the end of row 24. And that's it. Chain 1, turn your work, and work 3 full rows of single crochets into only the back loops again to maintain the ribbing. And at the end of row 45, you've completed the first half of the hat. And then for the second half of the beanie, all you need to do is repeat rows 2 to 44 one more time. Do not repeat row 45 because you need to end on an even numbered row to maintain the ribbing when seaming the hat. And here is what your hat will look like once you've completed that second repeat of rows 2 to 44 and fastened off. Now we're ready to seam, and I'm going to show you the best way I know of to maintain the rib stitch and hide the seam. So with the right side of the hat facing you, you will have the foundation chain row on the left and the final row on the right. And you'll know which one is the foundation chain row because there should be a tail from when you made that first slip knot. And now thread the needle, and then to seam the hat while maintaining the ribbing, we are going to use a mattress stitch and weave between the front loops of the single crochets in the foundation chain row and the inner loops of the tops of the single crochets in the last row. So pull your yarn through that first inner loop on the right hand side, pointing your needle upwards, and then again with your needle pointed upwards, pull the yarn through the front loops of the single crochets on the other side. And just leave a little bit of a tail hanging through so that at the very end you can tie that tail to the initial piece of yarn that was used when you had started your foundation chain at the very beginning. You can just tie those together and then weave them in. So continue inserting your needle into the inner loops on the right hand side and the fronts of the single crochets on the left hand side all the way up. I know that seaming isn't most people's favorite part of the process, but I think it's a great opportunity to practice slowing down and bringing your attention to be fully in the moment. So I want to encourage you to try to embrace this step and see it as a way to de-stress rather than being a means to an end. Okay, so once you've done a few stitches, you can tug the yarn at both ends and see that the ribbing looks continuous on the outside of the hat. And then continue doing this all the way up until the entire side of the hat is seamed and the only part remaining is the very top of the hat. And at that point, all you need to do is flip the hat inside out and whip stitch across to close that gap. And it doesn't need to be super precise here. Just align the ribbing and insert the needle wherever it feels like you've got a good secure point. So just keep whip stitching by pulling the yarn over and through. I'm assuming you know how to do a whip stitch here, but if you don't, there's a lot of tutorials out there that teach how to whip stitch. That's it. All that's left is to weave in the ends and then you can try on your brand new beanie. So I really hope you enjoyed this pattern, and if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the description below for the link to the free pattern as well as links to the ad-free PDF file if you do want to purchase that.